This is Frank, and he's agreed to answer the 3 dream questions.
Right.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The first question is about your hopes and dreams or aspirations for the future. And it can be on any level. It can be personal, family, world, whatever.
Well, I can't really directly answer that question without giving a little background about me. And I don't mean background like where did I study in school, that kind of thing, as much as a little bit of my growing up background. And my earliest memory, at least I think it's a memory, it may be that it's not really a memory, it's that somebody has put this memory in my head, and is of playing in a sandbox. I was probably 4 years old, something like that, with a kid whose, I think his name was Chris, who I have not seen since then. We were living in a naval housing development where my father was stationed after the war. This would have been 1946 about, when he came back from the Philippines. I mention all that because my father and mother divorced shortly after that. While he was away fighting the good fight, so to speak.
The greatest generation.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's what they say. My mother was left at home with me and my 3-year older than me sister, and didn't have much education. She had left high school without finishing high school, and jobs were in short supply, especially for women, and she had a tough go of it. But that didn't help when he came back and was expecting this cozy home life, and he wasn't getting it. So anyway, I'm saying all of that because they divorced, and apparently I was very close to my mother. She didn't show up for the divorce hearing, and so the judge gave custody of me and my sister to my dad. He wasn't prepared to deal with 2 little ones. So
what I'm hearing is somebody that just came back from the war ends up with 2 children.
Yeah, well, and with all of the problems that are related to that, I might add that not only was he not prepared to deal with that, but he too was not an educated person. He dropped out in 7th grade, and so he could only get kind of work as he could. Very kind of menial kinds of jobs, and so he went about in search of a new wife, which he did find. And so the mother, stepmother actually, who raised me, came into my life when I was almost 5 years old. But apparently I was very close to my birth mother. I don't have any direct memory of her except little snatches of someone singing to me, because I was a very sickly little boy with asthma. And I'm getting around to answering the question about hopes and dreams because my very early years, I don't mean age 3, I mean from beginning of school, 5, 6 years old, through maybe until today, is that hoping to have someone who really cared about me, and that was a pretty modest, it seemed like, dream to me, but I didn't feel like that anybody cared about me, and so I was a very lonely little boy.
So this is kind of going, if the second question is, what do you remember your early hopes and dreams?
Well, I mean, in fact, my stepmother, this is later on when I went off to college, she even wrote to me one time. She said, "You're always such a quiet, lonely seeming little boy." And I remember just feeling that feeling of not belonging, that people didn't care about me. I had friends, but somehow I wasn't the same. And I've always felt that if I could have some close people who would always be there, that was a big hope. And I think that's a little bit, I'll say, odd. It's not like I want to be an astronaut or I want to be. It's more indefinite than that. But that I would be happy if I had a warm, loving, nurturing family. My stepmother was a good woman, but she was stern, and I never felt close to her. My father was always remote. And I can never remember being read to. I can never remember my father taking me outside to play ball with me, or, that kind of thing. That, they weren't that they were bad people. They took care of us. I had a step brother who came into the family when I was 6 years old. And I think he would say the same thing, that there was never a loving family. It was a family where, sure, they cared about us. But this loneliness and wanting to have somebody who, more nurturing, has stayed with me. And I think you could say, well, gosh, when you're 75 years old, you shouldn't be thinking about being lonely or with all this family that you have around you now. But the feelings, those kinds of feelings and yearnings develop early. And with me, they developed, I think, as early as 3, 4, 5 years old. And I don't know if you ever saw the movie, the Coen Brothers movie, Brother, Where Art Thou? In there's all this Go to Sleep Little Baby kinds of singing with Emily, what's her name, Alison Krauss and so on singing. When I saw that movie the first time, when I heard that song, I almost started crying. Something triggered in my mind. Apparently, my mother used to sing that to me. And Diana even asked me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I don't know, but maybe somewhere in my mind, I remember this being sung to me." So, now, bringing that loneliness and wanting to be in a nurturing and loving kind of environment relates to what I could say would be a more tangible hope or desire, and that is to travel. I had this wanderlust from as early as I can remember to want to get away from here and go see the world. And I remember we lived not far from the railroad tracks that went through town near our house, and laying in bed at night, no air conditioning. This is in North Florida, and it was really humid and hot. With the windows open, hearing the trains go by, and me wishing I was on one of those trains. And that's an early memory, and I do remember that.
So if you were to translate that, I'm not trying to cut you short at all, but what I'm hearing is that there's this probably a human thing, but it got emphasized because of your situation. For you, the belonging, the warmth and stuff, and that moves you into what's going on today in your life. Yeah.
Well, what's kind of odd about that, and I think this might be interesting for a lot of people to know about who are younger than me, let's say, is that I was born during World War II. So right after World War II, there was this boom in housing development. So there were all of these little neighborhoods, so to speak, that sprung up, especially in a place like Florida. And in our one block area neighborhood, there were 25 kids. Some a little younger because they were born right after the war, and some, about my age, and some a few years older. But there were always kids, and there were always kids playing outside. So there's no shortage of me having friends. That had nothing to do with being lonely. Being alone and being lonely are different.
Two different things.
Yeah, I wasn't alone. By the way, this is kind of an interesting aside, because this is a back in the 40s, early 50s kind of phenomenon. In Florida, one of the big problems you face is mosquitoes if you're outside, and of course we had our share of the mosquitoes. They were everywhere, but they didn't keep us from being outside. But trucks would come by during the day, just fogging the whole neighborhood with DDT. This was not go inside and close the windows. This was just, breathe it in. They didn't think there's anything wrong with it. And of course, it's banned now.
Yeah.
But it killed the mosquitoes, but it also probably caused a lot of emphysema and other kinds of lung problems later on in people's lives. Yeah. But that's the times. The times were just different.
Rachel Carson.
That's right. I mean, it was pre-Rachel Carson, and she published, I think, in 58 or something like that. And see, by 58, I was 15 years old. So
you'd already had that. So, do you have some aspirations now? I mean, here we are. You said 75. You're really 75?
I'll be 76 next week.
Wow. Happy birthday.
Next Monday. I'll be.
Well, let me be one of the last to wish you a merry unbirthday.
August 12th, right. That's right.
As you look into the next 10 years, 15, 20 years, you have anything that you're looking for yourself, for your family, for the country, or?
Well, those are very different things. I mean, for myself, I figure I've got maybe 10 really good years left, 10, maybe 12. My father died when he was 87 with dementia. Yeah. Other family members of the men, at least, died around that age, sometimes a little bit younger than that. So to be realistic, I think that's probably, of course, you think you're immortal. I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are. Unless you're on your deathbed, you think you're never going to die. But I think I've got another 10 or 12 years, and I have maintained this desire, this longing to travel. And Diana and I, my wife Diana and I, and before Diana, I was married before, and even before that, traveling was just in my blood, and been every continent except Antarctica. And I understand that's a bucket list thing to do if you can go to Antarctica.
The last person I interviewed, that was her hope and dream, was to go to Antarctica. Isn't that, it's funny you bring that up.
Yeah, well, I know a couple of people who have been there, and they said it's a great place to visit. Obviously, you wouldn't want to live there. But for visiting, it's a good place to go. Anyway, so that's the only place I haven't been, but we're continuing to do that. In fact, we were expecting 2 weeks from now to be going to Turkey for an extended stay of driving all over the country with a couple of friends. Had to be postponed because one of the friends' father became very ill, and he needs to be home with him in Turkey, taking care of him because his mother is too ill to help. Yeah. So we decided, rather than putting the extra stress on him to have to worry about us, let's just postpone the trip for now. But that's our next big one, because this is not going to Istanbul and looking at the sights. This is traveling all over the country. And he's from a little village, and our plan was we were going to go to a wedding of one of his cousins.
Wow.
A Muslim wedding. We were welcome to go take part in that, and we thought that would be a great thing to do, to go see how little villages, put on the Ritz, so to speak, for
their weddings.
People getting married.
So your dream would be, one of your dreams, and maybe the central dream would be to continue traveling.
Well, continue traveling is a big part of it. Obviously, I still, want to make sure that I can hold back this loneliness sense as long as possible, and I think part of that is being accepted and close to Diana's family, because I'm close to my brother, but not really many of the other families. I mean, I feel responsible for some of them who aren't doing so well, and some who have health problems, and so I go and see them occasionally and provide financial support, but I'm not close to them the way I am to the folks here. So I want to, as long as my health is good, I want to continue to do that. I think you would agree with this. How it changes your perspective on the world when you get to be in some other culture and see that not everybody thinks the same way you do.
And they're still good people.
And that's absolutely. Still good
people.
In fact, there are some people I wish I could see those people again. I wish I could be with them. I mean, because sometimes you can lay in bed at night and start thinking about a time when I was living in Brazil and was in a little town, Ribeirão Preto, which is Black River, being met at the train by a man I'd never met before. I was going to be giving a lecture at the university near there. This is in the middle of Brazil. This is not in Rio or São Paulo or someplace like this. This is in the middle of Rio, and he didn't speak any English, and my Portuguese was, let's say, halting. Although I tried to speak, and I lectured in Portuguese, but it's different from having a real conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
So he didn't know what to say. I didn't really know what to say. He broke the ice, so to speak. It was really hot there, 100 degrees or so. He said, "Do you drink beer?"
That was it.
Yes, of course, I had seen.
It's like music. It's a universal language.
He said, "We have the best beer in the world here."
Oh.
So probably an hour later, he was my best friend.
Yeah.
And I still think of him from time to time.
It reminds me of the dating website I saw. This lady said, if you don't look like your profile picture, you have to buy me drinks until you do.
Well, right. Well, that was 30 plus years ago,
wow.
And I
think of
I remember the guy. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if I'd recognize him now because not only has he aged and I've aged, but
you remember the feeling that.
Visual images are more fleeting than other kinds of. I mean, you may
Yeah.
remember things, but they may not be how a person looks.
You remember how you felt.
But that's an example,
Yeah.
because I learned a lot about the things that made him who he was and made him have the values he had. He had nothing to lose by talking to me or me talking to him. So it's not that we got roaring drunk or anything, because we didn't. After all, I was there to give a lecture.
Yeah. Portuguese already sounds like slurred Spanish.
Actually, it's amazing how much better your language becomes.
Yeah. We're all a lot smarter after a certain point, too.
There's another story about Brazil, but I won't go into that one. But it's related to how much better your speaking ability becomes as your tongue loosens, so to speak. Your inhibitions go away. I've always been a very guarded person, partly because of this loneliness feeling of not wanting to risk, making friends with somebody I'm going to lose.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, not being vulnerable, right.
Wow.
And so it was easier to talk to somebody I didn't know well, I think, than sometimes with people I was supposed to be close to. It's probably the reason why my first wife and I didn't stay together. Is that we were too much alike. I mean, she was also very guarded, and as was I. We didn't share feelings as much. It's an old story.
Yeah.
By the way, one of the things that I might mention to you, this related to this loneliness and the kind of the longing business. Although I can't point to anything that made it unhappy, I didn't have a happy childhood. I mean, I wasn't beaten or I wasn't ignored or any of that, but I wasn't happy. And the thing about that was that as a result, when I became an adult, I was absolutely certain, even when I got married, I'll never have children. I don't want to bring children into the world who may be as unhappy as I was, which is really a sad thing, because I really regret that now. Not having had any children. And when Diana and I married, I was 51. I mean, it's a little late to start a family. Could have adopted, of course, but I just couldn't imagine having a son or a daughter going off to college when I was turning 70.
Yeah.
So that's not only about the finances of all that, but just
emotional.
It's just a little late. So it's talking about how I have changed. I think one of the things that I regret about my life, was that I had that attitude about children. I like children, but I didn't want to have my own because I didn't think I could be a good father. And fortunately or unfortunately, my first wife felt the same way.
I've got a question that looks got an airplane
We have,
coming over.
a float plane is flying over.
Yeah,
Right.
incoming. So if you could go back now, knowing what you know, and you could talk to that little boy, and you could whisper in 12-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old Frank's ear, and or if you could talk to adolescents generally. Let's talk about Frank first.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself?
I guess one of the things I would tell myself is related to this, how your beliefs and attitudes about life in general, but also about the way the world is, they're going to change, and be prepared for that. I was as set in my ways as any, young teenager can be. You're so sure that you're right, and why can't other people understand, what I'm getting at? And I mean, that's just a condition of being a teenager, I think. But to say, parents know to be patient; they'll get over it. But I think saying that to myself probably would have worked to some extent. Of saying, the attitude you have now, the expectations you have, are probably going to change as you get more life experience, more world experience, and be patient. And I think I wasn't patient. So you have to be patient, not just with yourself, but first of all with yourself, but of course with others.
So we're talking about patience and understanding that change is coming.
Change is inevitable.
Inevitable. It's going to happen. I remember thinking myself at a young age that the way things are now are the way things are going to be, and nothing's going to change. So I really like that advice. That's something
Well, I was involved. I wouldn't say heavily, but I was involved actively in the anti-Vietnam War movement back in the 60s into the 70s. I mean, I wasn't, a leader of or anything like that, but I participated in a lot of demonstrations and
you mentioned you took a bus. You'd ridden the bus to Washington.
Yeah, and did some other more local things, where demonstrating and trying to be an activist and talking to people and so on. I mentioned that not so much because I'm really proud of that, although I'm certainly not displeased with that.
Yeah.
But that those were really exciting times. Because I was involved, and so many other people were involved, and we thought we were going to be able to change the world, But what happened? We did change the world. The government did away with the draft. Because they didn't want to have all these malcontents coming, drafting them into this military service. I guess that's a good thing, but I'm not so sure. I think kind of mandatory national service is something we ought to have. It doesn't mean you have to go out and fight people, but gosh, our infrastructure would be in much better shape now if we had.
If we put our soldiers to work on our highways, and that's beautiful.
This is both men and women. It's not a thing for just. But anyway, that's. I say that. Today, I'm not as optimistic about. It was exciting times, and I thought we were really going to make a difference. Now, I've almost despaired that things are going to get better.
Something's becoming ingrained now. Is that's going to be harder to change or impossible to change?
I don't know. I don't know why I feel this way. It may simply be that. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Don't get fooled twice. Be more cautious.
Unless you're George Bush. Yeah. You remember his quote. You forgot the second part of that.
Yeah. Right. Well, but I think certainly you become more world weary as you get older. But it just seems to me that as the population grows, as resources get more scarce, as the environment becomes more fragile, as you're going to have worsening, not a lessening, of racial tensions, of fear that what you have is going to be taken away from you or it's going to be jeopardized. All that is maybe kind of natural. I remember reading back in the 1960s, a futurist named Don Fabun, F-A-B-U-N, wrote a book about the dynamics of change, and he said the biggest challenge of future generations, meaning right now, is how to use leisure time, because you're not going to need you for jobs. They're going to be artificial. I mean, Andrew Yang on television the other night in the debates said that more jobs have been lost to technology than to immigration. We're replacing jobs right and left by having things automated, and that's going to get more or so. Yeah. So people don't feel they have any worth. And I think that was not true back when I was a young person.
Wow. Yeah. I'm hearing something back relating to the first question.
Yeah.
Here again, it was when when we were talking about hopes and dreams or perceptions about the planet.
Yeah.
You do have some concerns. If you had and I asked this question quite a bit. If you had a magic wand and you were standing upside and you were gigantic, big enough to touch the whole planet with this big magic wand, what would you say? Earth, boom, do this. Or what would you change?
I think the main thing we're lacking in the world is empathy for others.
Empathy.
Having a sensitivity to the other people's points of view and to what is motivating these people, whoever they are, to behave the way they are, to believe what they do.
So your hope for the world might be a more empathetic.
Yeah, and for example, I'm not a person who knows a lot about the Bible, but I seem to recall that at one point King Solomon, was asked what gift God could give him that he would most value. And he said, Lord, to have an understanding heart. Now, Solomon did a lot of bad things as well as good things, but that has stuck with me. As an understanding heart is not just a golden rule thing. I mean, a golden rule is what would you like to have done for you, and then make sure that you would treat other people likewise. This is try to understand other people's way of living and behaving and the values they have and the culture they come from and what has made them the way they are, and maybe that'll help you understand better and maybe make you more tolerant as a result. Yeah. I would never be...
Should make us more compassionate.
Yeah, well...
If anything,
that kind of would be sort of an ultimate goal of this empathy, is have more compassion for others. But, as I said, I'm not optimistic. That doesn't mean by not being optimistic that you quit trying.
Yeah.
Because when you quit trying, I mean, that's loss of hope.
Well, you seem like you're pretty engaged in life still.
Well, it's another thing. If you had known me as a 40-year-old, let's say, engaged university professor, you would say that he is so impatient and so opinionated, and not necessarily about other people in the world, but about my colleagues. I was always getting in hot water because I would be fussing at somebody for not behaving right or not doing things right. And I think that's probably the single biggest thing that I've mellowed in my life about, and that is being patient with others and trying to understand their point of view.
Is there anything else that's come to the surface? If you could come up with a parting statement that...
Well, I think one of the things is to be kind to yourself. I mean, now being kind to yourself doesn't mean pampering yourself, but is always trying to be mindful of what would be best for you. Not as what would you like to do, but what would be best for you. You could say, well, just go eat those half dozen donuts if you'd love to have. Well, maybe half of one would be enough. But being kind to yourself is paying attention to what your needs are, but what would make you a more contented, compassionate, fulfilled person, if you are kind to yourself, that probably makes it easier to be that way towards other people.
Yeah. So. Thank you. I'm going to pause it now.
Okay.
And
so that's the long version.
That's the long version.